Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we're going to explore a doctor's journey from medicine to metaphysics. With me is my friend, Dr. Charles Tramont, who is a gynecologist, obstetrician, former head of surgery at a hospital in Ohio, currently a practitioner of hypnotherapy. He is the author of several books, From Birth to Rebirth and What's Missing in Medicine. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You began your career in medicine fairly conventionally. I mean, to my understanding, you did not start out as a metaphysician.
No, I was a pretty conventional guy to begin with, very definitely. I went to John Carroll University, which is a Jesuit university. I was raised Catholic, and then I traveled to New York City because I was accepted to New York Medical College, and got my MD there, and came back to Cleveland, did a year of internship and 3 years of a residency in obstetrics and gynecology in Catholic hospitals. And then I was ready for practice. Unfortunately, the Air Force had different ideas, and I found myself drafted by the Air Force for 2 years of active duty during the Vietnam War. And when I returned back to Cleveland, I was really ready for practice. And I found a guy who was in practice for a few years, and he was looking for a partner. And I said, great, so let's practice together. And it was a great practice, busy, a lot of deliveries, lots of surgery.
You were the head of surgery.
On and off, yeah. And I kind of liked that. I mean, I was also chief of OBGYN and president of County Medical Society, stuff like that. But when I was elected to be the head of the Department of Surgery on 2 occasions, and that's important to me because I'm elected by the surgeons. And when your buddies, and there was a lot of them, think you're good enough to do it, that made me feel pretty good.
I guess it's fair to say, to summarize this, that you were respected as a conventional surgeon and a conventional doctor.
Yeah, I delivered, well, the total years in practice was like 32 years, but I was with this particular doc for about 17 years. The practice was so busy that I got kind of burned out initially, and I needed something, and I decided to join the Air Force Reserve. And when I did that, I kind of got interested in becoming a flight surgeon. I took flight training a long time prior to that. I almost killed myself on my soloed, but I didn't. But at any rate, flight surgeons were taking on really exciting missions. And I had two partners then. They covered me nicely for several months while I went to aerospace medical school. And I got to tell you, some of the exciting missions. I had one where we landed on a C-130 with an engine on fire, and we did an assault landing. It's a real quick landing, and got the heck out of there before the thing blew up. And that was in a B-52 bomber, and we're being refueled at around 30,000 feet. And a KC-135 tanker comes within 20 feet of us, above us, drops the boom, and fills up our tank. Problem was we couldn't disconnect the boom. And if we tried to eject with our parachutes, we go right up into the tanker. If we tried jumping out an opening, we get sucked in by one of the 8 engines. So we were working hard with wrenches and screwdrivers. We finally disconnected. It took us a half hour more flying 20 feet apart to mock whatever it was.
Oh my gosh.
But those exciting missions. But I enjoyed all that stuff. I don't know why, but it was really cool.
But I assume that even though you were working at a Catholic hospital, and even though you were part of the Air Force, where they have, for example, chaplains, your interest in hadn't yet been awakened.
No, nothing yet. But
people would describe you as a competent medical professional, but not an unusual person in any way.
Even in the Air Force, I was assigned or chosen to be squadron commander, and passed the Air War College program, and then finally I kept getting promoted to a full colonel. And I could have made brigadier general, but they wanted to send me to Washington. But I said, I got to practice, guys, really. So, but at any rate, I broke off from the 17 years after I was with the other guys. We had a problem with the accountant, and I didn't agree with him, so I decided to go solo. And it was at that time that I went to a meeting. It was a medical meeting on hypnosis and past life regression, which we never saw before. And I really got interested in this. I could see a tremendous therapeutic value here, potential for healing people.
Well, it sounds like then that you were very open-minded about reincarnation.
Yeah, well, at that point, yeah.
Having been raised Catholic,
oh yeah, I know.
Reincarnation is not part of Catholic theology.
Reincarnation is heresy as far as Catholic Church is concerned. But I looked it up really carefully, and I found out that it was part of the religion until the 6th century, and the Roman Emperor, a guy named Justinian, had a problem with it, and he wanted to get rid of it. Now, the Pope Vigilius usually has to attend all these ecumenical councils, but the Emperor called an ecumenical council, and the Pope knew what he was up to, wanted no part of it, boycotted the meeting, did not go. But Justinian got it through, and now it's in stone. It's heresy, and I'm sorry, it's wrong. And the reason I know it's wrong is I have done thousands of patients, but I have many, many hundreds that I've been able to validate dates and events. I've had patients speaking languages they don't know, and so on. But the greatest proof, and I talked to a guy named Irvin Mortis, who was a hypnotherapist years ago, and I spoke to him when he's in his 90s. I'm sure he's not around. But he had a case of a 32-year-old guy who had a 10th grade education, took him back to 16 lifetimes, and he spoke 16 different languages and wrote them out under hypnosis. Ancient Egyptian, ancient Gaelic, and a whole array of all these other languages. And then they repeated the whole session in a research center with several doctors signing off as witnesses. So it happened. And now that case is in the Hypnotherapy Encyclopedia. And to me, that's as close to scientific evidence as you can get.
Well, we call that xenoglossy in parapsychology, when someone can speak a language that they had never learned. It's
I remember the term
very
xenoglossy.
Rare and quite impressive when it occurs.
It's really. I had one patient speak ancient Gaelic too, and she was the one who. Well, anyway, let me
yeah, we're jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah, right. Well, anyway, when I
you went to the course.
I went through the and then along came Desert Storm, and I was gone again for several months. And I got back. I wanted to test the therapeutic value. So first patient I decided to use it on was a really nice gal. She's like 33 years old. I hadn't seen her for 4 years. And when I examined her, she had a pelvic tumor. It extended into the abdomen. Took her to surgery, opened her up, and she was full of metastatic cancer. And that was one of the hardest days of my life to break the news to her. Pathology said she had a couple months to live. But she agreed to go under, and I took her to several different lifetimes. She sees herself dying and being reborn over and over and over. And I'm sure it gave her a feeling that she's an eternal being. This is one of many lives she's going to live, and it's a good way to face life, and I think it's a good way to face death. But what I did is my office was down the street from the hospital, so I was able to see. And I did all the work on hypnosis gratis with the patients. And I would do it after hours or while waiting for delivery, because I could just go back to the hospital real quick. At any rate, and I remember I had a gal with nausea and vomiting in a pregnancy. Sometimes that can be a real problem. And I admitted this patient 4 times to the hospital. The 4th time I walked in the hospital, I walked in her room, I shut the door, and I hypnotized her, and she never had another problem. But I mean, so I hypnotized a lot of patients for delivery too, instead of anesthesia and so on.
So you've done births without anesthesia.
Oh yeah. And I did about close to 4,000 deliveries and thousands of surgeries. But My practice was about 32 years long, and I, at this time, I heard during one of the conferences, a hypnotherapist tell his patient, "I'd like you to telepathically communicate with your spirit guide." And I remember we have several spirit guides. They're either assigned to us or they volunteer to help us, but they're very helpful.
Now, when you say you remember, where do you remember that from?
Oh, well, a lot of places. But when I started working with patients, I would sometimes have a master spirit, even, we're very high up in the hierarchy, come through. And when I get one like that, I would ask him a lot of questions, you know.
Okay.
Anyway,
let me be clear so our viewers understand. At this point, you've been practicing hypnosis with your patients for some time, and under hypnosis, you would interview their spirit guides.
That's what I started to do, and I thought, am I able to communicate with them? And I tried it, and it worked. And I took a patient up to their higher self hypnotically and asked for them to call forth their guide. And I asked him, when he showed up, can I ask you some questions? Yeah. And they were able to tell me all kinds of stuff, like how many past lives this patient had, what lessons they needed to learn during this reincarnation period. And is there any past life contributing to their particular problem, depression, anxiety, whatever the heck they had? I mean, all kinds of good stuff they were able to come up with. So it's a tremendous shortcut. And
but let me ask you this. Though, and this is I know we've discussed this issue before, it's a difficult issue, but under hypnosis, the patient is very suggestible, and the patient wants to please you because you're the hypnotist. Is there, what do you do to make sure that the answers that you're getting ostensibly from the spirit guide aren't answers coming from the patient for the purpose of confirming your belief system in order to make you happy?
I use so many patients and so many patients' spirit guides that I was pretty much able to tell what the truth was and what it wasn't. It became quite interesting. Then one day I had a patient by the name of Jason, and I call that case my baptism of fire case. Jason was a writer, and he needed to write, but he had an obsession for feudal Japanese culture. He needed to be off doing stuff like that, martial arts, whatever. But he needed to write, and he'd argue with himself. He needed to sound right. So I took him back to the cause. He goes back to being 16-year-old son of a feudal Japanese farmer. And he wanted badly to join the emperor's army. His parents couldn't afford much, but they got him bamboo armor. And now he's marching with the emperor's army, and he's proud as the dickens. And they're going through a narrow gorge. There's hundreds of them. And all of a sudden they hear some screaming, and a bunch of the enemy come charging through, carrying spears and riding horses. And he catches a spear right in the belly. Now Jason is dying in the mud, and he's very upset. And he yells, "Where's the honor? I never got to fight." And then he says, "And Jason won't do what I want him to do." And I wanted to say, "Excuse me?" And then something dawned on me. How long have you been with Jason? Since he was 3. Evidently, I had not regressed Jason, but I regressed an entity attached to Jason, an earthbound spirit, actually. And I fumbled through it, but I was able to get that person to go to the light. But then I did a lot of research on spirit release, and books by William Baldwin were really great.
Now there's a whole form of psychotherapy known as spirit release or spirit release mint therapy.
Well, right. And I use some of Dr. Baldwin's methods, but I use a lot of my own too, because I'm using spirit guides. And the guides are great. And along the line, well, first of all, let me tell you about the entities that I encountered, which are the same types that Baldwin encountered. First of all, we're talking, I would have the spirit guide there, which is really important, and I would ask spirit guide, on this patient we're dealing with, is there any foreign energy present? And if I hear a yes, then I go for the dark forces first, because they're the real bad guys.
What does that mean? You go for the dark forces?
I will handle the dark forces and their hierarchy, the powerful dark forces, first, because they're not only evil, but they're sneaky as the dickens, too.
Now, it sounds like when you talk about dark forces and the hierarchy of dark forces that there's, it kind of sounds like Catholic theology.
No. It's a hierarchy of the bad guys. They're really demonic.
Well, isn't that part of Catholic theology?
Yeah, but they don't get into entities particularly. But at any rate, the hierarchy they're the head guys, the powerful dark forces. They treat the regular dark forces like slaves. They tell them, number one, you don't have any light. Light is harmful, and it can even destroy you. And if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to be punished, and you may be destroyed. So they make sure the dark forces do exactly what they want to be done.
Okay.
And when I work with, first I ask the spirit guide, what do we got? Dark forces. How many dark forces? How many powerful dark forces? And then I do an exorcism. You want to know how I do the exorcism?
Well, so you consider yourself an exorcist?
I sure as heck do, because I've done zillions of them now. First of all, I use the crucifix. And I use the crucifix I had in the 4th grade. It's plaster. It was broken in 2 places, but it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
It's powerful. I mean, when I'm inducing a patient, just to show you how powerful it is, once in a while the patient will say, oh, my head's about to explode, or my chest is killing me, or something's pulling my arm or my leg. And I knew that's dark forces. So I just touch it with the crucifix, gone, just like that.
Really?
Really. And then press the dickens out of it. Okay. At any rate, I do the exorcism, and I start off by calling for the warrior angels of light and to surround and protect. And
may I interrupt for just a second?
Go ahead.
Because your mention of the crucifix seems so powerful. Is it because you maintain you were born Catholic? You're still I
consider myself a Christian. I love Jesus. Blessed Mother is very special to me, and so on.
So the crucifix has a lot of personal meaning for you.
Yes, right. I don't lose that just because of the rules and the regs attached to the religion, which drives me crazy. At any rate, I call for the warrior angels of light and legions of heaven to surround and protect, and I ask the spirit guide to tell me when they're in position. And they're there to protect patient, myself, and anybody in the room. And then I call for the rescue spirits of light to come and encapsulate all these dark forces and powerful dark forces in a tight capsule of God light, and tighten down so much so they are immobile. And tell me when that's been accomplished, and if you need help, let me know. But if there's a massive number of dark forces or powerful dark forces, I may throw St. Michael the Archangel and Metatron, the other warrior archangel, in the battle.
What, you may throw them?
Well, whatever you want to call it.
I want to know what you call it.
Well, I ask them, to use. So
in other words, these
guys
are
enter the battle.
Spiritual entities that are available to you.
Oh yeah, and St. Michael the Archangel is very special, and he's something else. But sometimes I've used all the archangels if it was a tremendous battle. I've even used Jesus at times. We always win, but it takes a lot sometimes.
We've gone a long distance at this point in this conversation, from you being in a seminar for the very first time, learning about reincarnation, to now you're calling on spiritual entities and conducting exorcisms. So I think
it's true.
Our viewers, they have a little trouble following step by step how you got from being, a flight surgeon to an exorcist.
Because the entities are something else, and
do you feel you were guided by them?
They're very real. I think God has been guiding me on this whole trip, because I've been able to release all these entities from patients, get rid of all the foreign energy, and then I give them a protection. But
let me just interrupt you once again. I'm sorry for interrupting so many times, but what you're saying is so powerful, so unusual, so awesome. That I want to make sure our viewers follow what you did step by step. And what I gather is that for you as a medical doctor, your confirmation about the metaphysical approaches that you're taking is based on the criteria. I would call it a pragmatic criteria. Does it work? When you're in a psychotherapy situation, are you getting results?
Well,
is that your primary criteria?
I don't like your terminology here, but
yeah.
No, it works. Yeah. And let me just finish the exorcism, because after I have them all tightened up in these godlight capsules, I call for St. Michael the Archangel to take them to a special place in the light that he takes them, and ask the guide to tell me when he's accomplished this. And then when he's accomplished it, then I know that dark forces are all gone to the proper destination they need to go.
In other words, it's the guide who is doing this work, not you necessarily.
The guide is confirming every step of the way and confirms that these entities go to the proper destination.
And you're talking about the patient's guide, not your own guide.
Yeah, the patient's guide. Yeah, user guide. And then I eventually, well, let me just go down the line with the entity. This is kind of important. We'll do it quickly. The earthbound spirits are the next ones. It's another human form, whereas dark forces are a non-human form of entity. But the earthbounds are a person who dies, declines going to the light. Different reasons. Could be a mother worried about her kids. Could be an addict wants to jump onto somebody and turn them into an addict and get as high that way. At any rate, if they attach to people, they bring all their mental and their physical problems right to that. If they had an ulcer, you're going to get an ulcer. If they were depressed, you're going to be depressed, and so on. So they really can affect you. And I've had many patients with 20 and 30 earthbound spirits.
It's sort of a parasitic relationship.
Yeah, and what I do is I interview each one. Now, if there's so many of them, sometimes I'll say, if anybody's had depression among you earthbound spirits, step forward. And then I'll get him and drill him.
And drill him?
Well, I mean, drill him on all the all the questions that I need to.
You ask a lot of questions, and that helps you to remove that parasitic entity.
Well, sometimes too, dark forces can attach not only to people but to entities. They can attach to an earthbound spirit or whatever. And if the person's really hostile, does not want to go to the light, I'll ask, is there a dark force? Yes, there's several. Okay, well, I'll do another exorcism, get rid of them, then we'll work with the spirit guide.
Let me just ask you this question, because we've covered such a long distance.
I know.
You had medical training, which includes a lot of scientific training. Did some part of you rebel against all the metaphysics?
No, I went along with all the physicality involved and so on.
Yeah.
But when I got into this whole business, it's very spiritual. And I consider myself very spiritual, not religious. I mean, I got to think about rules and regs and all this other stuff. I consider myself spiritual, and God is helping me all the time with what I'm doing.
Well, what about your training as a scientist?
That's all fine and good, but it took the back seat to what I'm doing now in terms of what I'm able to accomplish. These people go to psychiatrists or whoever, and they'll take all these pills and see me every week for the next month or 2 or 3 months, and they don't really accomplish that much. I can cure a patient in, well, I'll be able to tell you why in a few minutes, in 1 session or a maximum of 2 sessions. I found out that the dark forces can also pretend to be a spirit guide. So I had to test him. I would always ask him, can I send you a gift of light? Will you accept it?
Watch out for your mic.
I'm sorry. Will you accept it? And if it's a dark force, they'll just say nothing, or they'll say no. Or I had one say, no way, Jose. But powerful dark forces, they can lie about anything. And they'll also say, I love Jesus. I had one help me get rid of 40 dark forces, but something was still bothering me about him. So I said, tell me, why do you do this? He says, because I love it. And I know doggone well it's powerful dark force. And I did an exorcism and got rid of them. Then I had a woman, an older woman, very sophisticated woman. All of a sudden, when she's under, she got all growly and snarly and evil smiles and evil laughter. And finally I looked at her and says, okay, I know you're in there. Have the guts to talk to me. And then I heard, you don't want to mess with me. And I said, you don't want to mess with St. Michael the Archangel, buddy boy. And then did another exorcism, got rid of him. You don't ever show fear. Fear is our greatest weapon. I say, screw them, But at any rate, I found out that the dark forces can pretend, and they can also do something else. They can stop a guide from coming through. I suspected this. And about 85% of the time, the guide can get through, but the other 15% no.
I see.
And I ended up with a spirit guide by the name of Abel one day, and he was on his way to becoming a master spirit. Boy, I asked him a lot of questions, and I said, you know, I got this problem, and I mentioned it, and I said, I think it's dark forces that keeps the guide from coming through. And he says, you're right. I said, how do they do it? He says, they exude a mist, covers over everything, the guide can't get through. I said, what'll I do? He says, call me. I've called Abel well over 600 times.
Now, Abel was a spirit...
He's a spirit guide on his way to becoming a master spirit.
Of one of your patients.
Of one of my patients. And he's done a hell of a job. He's my volunteer spirit guide. If I can't get the guide to come through, I call for Abel. But then Abel can only get through about 80-85% of the time.
Oh.
So I had to come up with another idea. And one day I had a mother and a daughter, and I remember getting the spirit guide on the mother, but not on the daughter. So I called them up and said, I'd like to do a gratis session for the two of you together. So I had them both come in, did them side by side. I called this a dual session to see if the mother's guide could tell me what's going on with the daughter, and it worked beautifully. I almost yelled, hot damn. I mean, I was so excited because this is so important. And since that day, I've had an assistant with a consistent spirit guide. So if I can't get to the guide and I can't get to Abel, I have him return for a second session with an assistant, and we do a dual session with the assistant and with the patient. And their consistent spirit guide handles whatever we need to handle. Well, we can usually cure them.
Dr. Charles Tramont, this has been quite an adventure. We're going to do a second interview, so we'll go into even more depth, and I want to encourage our viewers to check out part 2 of this series.
Part 2, okay.
Yeah. Chuck, thank you so much for being with me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jeffrey.
And thank you for being with us.